What an example we get from the life of Joseph. Gosh, seemingly at every turn he did right, and seemingly at every turn he got wronged. It's powerful. Let's check in on the royal family this week, shall we? We've been following them along, and our goal in that is to realize this is us. Like literally we see these men and some women and these figures in the Old Testament, and literally so far we've seen nothing but pretty much total dysfunction. The royal family, of course, we're talking about the Jewish patriarchs, not our friends across the pond. What did we skip, by the way? Well, we left off kind of Jacob, maybe and Esau, made up a little bit and went to bury their dad. While they were gone, Jacob's oldest son, Reuben, connected with one of his concubines, if you know what I mean. More dysfunction there. So Reuben's not doing so good. One of the sisters, by the name of Dinah, was apparently sexually assaulted by a neighboring village. And the guy was so taken with her after the assault, he wanted to buy her for his wife, offered a world record bride price. But Simeon and Levi said, well, we can't sell her to you because you're uncircumcised. So this guy says, not only will I get circumcised, I'll circumcise the whole village. And while they're recovering from this, Simeon and Levi showed up with swords and killed every single one of them. And then took their women and children. This is the royal family. This is the backdrop to our Messiah's story. So don't ever sit here and go, well, I want to serve God, but I can't because I've got this problem and that problem. If you'll admit the problem, you are primed to serve God. Dysfunction at every turn. Lies. Scheming. I mean, it started with Abraham. God calls this guy out of this pagan culture, out of this background. And you know what? We don't see modeled here as that kind of quick fix, right? What Abraham needed to do, he needed to get baptized and give his life to the Lord. Well, we want to be careful that we don't present quick fixes like that in Christianity because we want the journey. God wants the journey with us. Will we journey with him? So Jacob, now called Israel, like I said, he's got 12 sons. And today, we're going to look at Joseph, one of those sons, and probably one of, not perfect, he was a sinner, but one of the Bible's best examples. And so in a sense, we're like, finally, man, someone who's kind of got it together with the story of Joseph. We'll pick up in Genesis chapter 37. So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. This is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. And we named their kids Bilhah, Zilpah. Probably not here, but wait a minute. This guy put in 7 years and got had and married the wrong wife, commits to another 7 years, and now he's got the wife he wanted, right? Wouldn't that be enough? No, somewhere along the journey, he finds 2 more wives, and then he's got concubines as well. And this is one of those things, it's right along the likes of slavery. Like, why don't you see it indicted more in the scriptures? When you look at this multiple wives things, and I tell you, I experienced it, not in my life, but when we were in the jungle, literally there's nothing like sitting around in a remote hamlet with one of your buddies. Maybe you went on a hunt and you're hanging out, and he's like, you know what, I have to take my wives and go now. And he gets up and leaves, and then his first wife gets up and leaves, and then his second wife gets up and leaves. And I'm just like, dude, that is just awkward. God never blessed it. Anytime you see it, it's pretty much a train wreck. But as interesting and as crazy as it is, what are the only 2 individuals or offices in the Bible that cannot take a second wife? Be the king, and they did. And the church elder, pastor elder. In fact, that is what really, really rocked the church in Sino, where we spent years, is because of the system is their social net. More kids means more people to produce food and take care of you when you're older. But anyway, it's kind of an elephant in the room if you don't address the story. It's like God let broken people be broken people so the story could move along. At any rate, so all sorts of weird stuff going on, and God's not hiding it, is he? You look at it, and you go, what a mess. You know what, maybe he will use me because he's not opposed to using messy people. People with some dysfunction and some nonsense in their life. So you got Joseph, but Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. We don't know what it was. Were they mishandling the goats? Were they being, I don't know what he was doing, but Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. Dysfunction. And I tell you, maybe there's one child that you kind of have a little something that's different than the others, but when you're not functionally enough, healthy enough to love your kids the same, you are setting that family up for a disaster. So it wasn't in the back of his mind. He thought, I really like to sit by so-and-so at Thanksgiving because we just seem to connect, right? No, this was an outward expression of love, and the other boys absolutely resented Joseph for it. I'm convinced this whole narrative was driven by their resentment, their hatred. And the text keeps coming back to that. Comes back to two things. God was with Joseph, and they hated him even more. Two sub-themes as we go through the narrative. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe, but his brothers hated him because their father loved him more than the rest of him. They couldn't say a kind word to him, couldn't even muster one up. One night, Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, he said. We're out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly, my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. His brothers responded, so you think you'll be our king, do you? Do you actually think that you will reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Oh, the damage of favoritism. Here we go. It starts it off. And you know what? You get the impression that maybe Joseph's kind of a little bit of a snitchy, nerdy kind of kid. Like, everyone else is kind of rough and tough, and we're out there wrangling and doing our thing with the livestock, and this little kind of 17-year-old goofy kid kind of nerdy. But I think that's a lot of presuppositions on our part. He might have been faithful. Those livestock were the entire family's inheritance. It was everything. And if a couple of these other sons aren't doing their job. But see, what happens is I think we get too much presuppositions. We suppose too many things by looking at movies. And look, I think right here in Simi, there's something going on with at the Cultural Arts Center right now with Joseph and the whole. It's a story that really has been sensationalized and brutalized and, well, quite frankly, butchered. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. This is what they're talking about. So these guys are out in the field, and Jacob's like, you know what? Last time they weren't doing so good. Why don't you go find them? Kind of check on them again. Probably should have done that yourself there, Jacob. Set the kid up. Let's move forward. And we're bouncing around today, guys. We're looking at Joseph, not this entire story. And Joseph's brothers, they see him coming, and they recognize him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. Here comes the dreamer. They said, come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal is eating him, and we'll see what becomes of his dreams. But when Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. Let's not kill him, he said. Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him. Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. So Joe arrives, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There's really no water in it. Then, just as they were sitting down to eat. Could you fathom that? Let's kill him. No, not kill him. Let's just let him slowly die of hunger and dehydration. And Reuben's like, no, thinking to himself, I'll come back and get him. How dysfunctional is that? What selective morality? Because you know what he's going to do then? This is what the ancient Jewish rabbis thought because of his affair with one of his dad's ladies. He's trying to get back into dad's good graces. But think about this. Morality would have been to stand up and say, I'm the oldest. This isn't going to happen. Get over it and taking him home. Instead, he plots and plans. I'm going to come back and get him. What kind of dysfunction is going to rip through the family then? Reuben might be in good standing, but it's like at every turn, this family just can't get it together. Just as they're sitting down to eat, enjoying their meal with their brother, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and Aramaic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, hey, look, we're going to gain by killing our brother. We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother in our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. Do you ever compromise with your convictions? Like, I really want to kill him, but I'm not gonna. So let's do this instead. I think that might be one of the reasons why Jesus speaks about the thought life and sins, huh? There's no pure motive even in Judah. Judah, if you have those convictions, Reuben, if you have those convictions, do the right thing with them. What an absolute disaster. So he gets sold to these traders. You've seen the movie, you've read the story. Down into Egypt he goes, and he gets sold into the house of Potiphar, who's like a general, like a captain in the army, and we believe he was a chief executioner. Egypt is a brutal place. If they don't like you, if you do something wrong, they kill you. So he goes into this household, and God was with him, and he slowly begins to prosper. And in time, Potiphar literally puts him in charge of everything. See, sometimes we look at a tragedy, and it's like the end all, and we're just kind of pouty and poopy, and nothing's good come of it. But the text says, God was with him, and he did well. But then he takes another blast from this nasty world. It came about later, after these events, that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph. And she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in his house. He has put all that he owns in charge of me. That's a pretty good promotion for a slave. He's literally running this place. He's learning and he's growing, and he totally turns down her advances. Does the right thing. He says, there's no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God? As she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. You know, it's one thing, maybe if somebody winks at you when you're out and about, or maybe somebody does something a little flirty, or whatever the case might be. But I want you to think about this guy. 17, 18, maybe he's 19 or 20 by now. He didn't get to do the prom thing. He didn't get to date. He's a normal man. He's a pretty good-looking guy from what we gather. And you know, I don't know about you guys, but I think vulnerability happens when you're a victim. You have that victim mentality, you're vulnerable to sin. Why? Because you need something to create an endorphin release in your body. What greater? Alcohol, drugs, and sex. I don't know if he had access to wine, but I dare say, well done, Joseph, to turn this down. How could I do this great evil and sin against God, he says. As she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. Now it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the other men of the household were there inside. She caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and he fled, and he went outside. I wonder how many people who heard the words of the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. It says, flee, run from sexual immorality. That's exactly what Joseph did. The only thing he didn't do is manage to take his clothes with him because she got hold of him. He says, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to betray the boss, and I'm not going to sin against God. Trust. Joseph was faithful. He could be trusted and applauded for that. And you'd think, you know what? Maybe that's what this trial was all about. You guys ever think that? Like, I withstood the trial. I got through that. I said no. I ran. I'm down a little bit of my wardrobe, but it doesn't matter. I did the right thing, Father. And now can I go home, see my dad? Can I have my life back now? Can this nonstop barrage against me, can it slow down? Didn't I do right? Haven't I put up with enough? Nope, not for him. When she saw that he left his garment in her hand and fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he's brought in a Hebrew to us to make sport of us. He came in to lie with me, and I screamed. Who's the he there? He brought in a Hebrew. She's blaming her husband. You brought him here. What am I supposed to do? But that gives us a little indication. Major problems here. When he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside. So she left his garment beside her until his master came home. But see, Potter had lived with her. He probably knows better. More than one commentary and scholar has suggested if there was an ounce of possibility to this, Joseph's head would have been gone. But Potiphar probably knew full well what a quality young man he had and what a not so quality wife he had. Sometimes the integrity comes back to almost save your life. But again, now he's cast into the dungeon. He's cast into the dungeon. He's locked up, completely innocent. Can't this kid get a break? Do you guys ever feel that way? Can't I get a break? Every time we turn around, I'm getting kicked in the gut, stabbed in the back, brutalized. While they're in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and the dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they both looked upset. Did you catch that? It's one of those really, really powerful qualities. In fact, it's about as Christ-like as you can get to be locked up, to be in prison, to make some relationships, and you wake up one day and you're hanging with your prison mates or whatever the case might be, and they look a little despondent. They're a little bit down. And so Joseph is such a quality guy, he turns that into an opportunity to do minister to them. It bothered him. He cared that his friends looked upset. That's powerful testimony too. Have you sat down to try and help someone and talk through what they're upset? Even me, we are just so absolutely self-focused. We all turn into narcissists when we're hurt, not Joseph. He kept his eyes in the right place. I've taken it from the left, the right, the middle, everywhere this young man goes, he gets a raw deal. He's investing in others. That's about as Jesus Christ-like as you will get. Powerful. And again, we have the movie and the things that make it look, let's just look at Psalm 105 for a minute, and I want you to picture the dungeon. Psalm 105 says this, he called for a famine in the land of Canaan. Who did? God did. Why did he do that? Don't know. Ask him when you get there. Cutting off its food supply. Then he sent someone to Egypt ahead of them. Joseph, who was sold as a slave, they bruised his feet with fetters and placed his neck in an iron collar until the time came to fulfill his dreams. The Lord tested Joseph's character. Oh no. What happens when he tests yours? And it might not be just a chance to pick up $100 you found on the ground and not turn it in or not do. No, this was a long, drawn-out test. Is this the guy? Can I trust this guy? God is sovereign. He knows everything. Why does he feel the need to do this? I'll say it again. In my opinion, it's because he wants the experience with you. He wants to know you in an experiential way. He wants to journey. He wants to test your character, and he wants to experience the quality of your being in that moment and have that moment be real. And we're so quick to dismiss all the idea that God wants to interact with us through our trials, through our struggles, through our sinful failures, and just go, well, he's sovereign and he knows, so it really doesn't mean anything then, does it? It's erroneous thought, guys. He took them on this journey. But I didn't know what a fetter was. Anyone know what a fetter is? Ankle chains. He would look down and his ankles were black and blue from being chained and trying to maybe move around a little bit. And he wore an iron collar around his neck. And he's interested in doing ministry in his friends' lives who had a bad dream. It's a quality individual who had it rough. Probably familiar with the story. The cupbearer. He tests everything that goes into Pharaoh's mouth because if he wants to poison him, the cupbearer dies. Pharaoh knows, don't drink that cup of wine. And he's got his own personal baker. Bakes whatever he wants. These guys get locked up for upsetting Pharaoh. They woke up, they had the bad dream. In steps Joseph. This is what the dream means, Joseph told him. The 3 baskets, he did the first dream. I'm kind of cutting just to the highlights here. The cupbearer is told, you're going to be good to go. All right, cool. This is what the dream means, Joseph told him. The 3 baskets also represent 3 days. 3 days from now, Pharaoh will lift you up and impale your body on a pole. The birds will come and peck away at your flesh. Good news from Joseph. But you know what that is right there? Once again, another example of character and integrity, to stand right there and give the bad news. And this helped save his life, because if he sugarcoats it and when the guy thinks he's getting out and he gets whacked, no one knows the difference. It's not true. God knows the difference, and sometimes we have to be the bearer of bad news. I don't like telling people without Jesus Christ, you will face God, and everything you've ever done will be used against you in his court. No lawyer, no nothing. He'll check the book of life. If you have not placed your faith in Jesus Christ, you will go to hell. We have to be the bearer of bad news sometimes, and it is a matter of integrity, isn't it? To stand right there and tell this guy. Had he not, I don't think Pharaoh was near as impressed. You know the end of the story. He needed to go 2 for 2 with these dreams. So one guy, the cupbearer, goes out. The other one goes to a pole and is killed. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. See, Joseph isn't enjoying this, and sure, he's trusting in God through the end. His faith is impressive, but he asked the cupbearer, hey, look, you're going to get back up there, man. You got to help me out. Tell him I'm innocent. Tell him I've been, do something for me. And this is the response he gets. He gets absolutely burned again. And then Pharaoh. Now Pharaoh's got the bad dream. And the cupbearer is like, oh yeah, there was a guy, a Hebrew. And so Joseph gets a chance now. Pharaoh calls him and says, let him figure it out. Bring him up here. So he's cleaned up, he's shaven. The Hebrews don't cut their beards. The Egyptians shave everything. So they've got to present him now because Pharaoh is the son of Ra, right? He believes he's a deity too. So you don't come into his presence unless you're all squared away. And in Genesis 41, verse 16, Joseph's discussion with Pharaoh. Can you interpret my dreams? No, Joseph says. It is beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied, but God can tell you what it means to set you at ease. We just skimmed through that. He just told the world's greatest narcissist who thinks he's God, the real God will do this. Do you know the guts that took? I just think of the Apostle Paul and what he went through. He's like Joseph 2.0. Why? He wanted an audience with Caesar. He wanted to stand right before another man who thinks he's God and proclaim Jesus Christ, the Son of God, risen from the dead for the forgiveness of sins. He wanted to share the gospel. It's the story all over again. The guts it took for Joseph to stand there and go, hey, slick, the real God will do this. It's like he didn't get himself killed just for saying that. So he interprets the dream, and it's the dream about this famine coming, and there's going to be 7 good years, and there's going to be 7 bad years, and all the details, et cetera, et cetera. And Pharaoh's like, someone's got to manage this thing. And he's so impressed that he puts Joseph in charge of everything. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen and clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck. Then he had Joseph ride in the chariot reserved for his second in command. And whenever Joseph went, the command was shouted, kneel down. So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. The signet ring, the garment. Because I think, honestly, when he stood right there in front of the supposed son of Ra and proclaimed the living God would deliver this, I think he passed his final test in that moment. It's one thing to look at a dude who bakes cakes. It's another thing to stand right there. I think Pharaoh saw it, God experienced it, and things changed for Joseph for the rest of his life. Why? Because God was with him. Why? Because God sent him ahead of everyone else into Egypt. Why? Because he's God, and that's what he did. Got no other explanation for you. Powerful, as this young man suffers. And you'd think, actually, well, this is a total picture of Jesus. So maybe Joseph, and later you see the other tribes of Israel kind of coming and bowing down, and there's maybe some imagery there suggested that one day all of Israel, and as Christians, we look forward to that day when all of Israel will come to faith and bow down to their Messiah. So there's this temptation to go, what a messianic figure. But he's not in the line of Christ. Judah is. Jesus Christ is the Lion from the tribe of Judah. Well, Judah must be quite the guy then, right? Where's Judah in the story? Probably busy hiring a prostitute who turned out to be his daughter-in-law. Do we understand the dysfunction? It's like God had to take one man and say, I've got to find a way to model that it is possible to be a man of integrity, to be faithful, to be godly, to speak the truth when you have to speak the truth, to stand up for me. None of these other guys do. Every time God turns around, it's like, really, dude, another concubine? Another wife? Where did this whole concubine thing come from? Do you know what a concubine is? He gets all the privileges of having her as a wife, but she gets no respect, honor, integrity, nothing. It's just a mistress that everyone knows about. And then there's Joseph. Wouldn't even touch a Potiphar's wife after years in captivity from a low place. We found a man of integrity, and now he's about to be rewarded for it. So Joseph was governor of all of Egypt and in charge of selling grain to all the people. It was said to him that his brothers had came. When they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where are you from? He demanded. Well, from the land of Canaan. They replied, we've come to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. And I'm not going to cover all of the rest of the story, but he goes on to kind of deceive them, to test their hearts. His younger brother Benjamin and his dad, he kind of manipulates the whole situation. And at first he says, I'm going to hold the whole family. And then he kind of comments that he fears God, so I'm just going to hold one of you. He's struggling here. He has got trust issues. But the text doesn't blame him for that at all. Oh, but I think if we have trust issues, probably a little shenanigan like this wouldn't be really how the Lord would have you handle it, but this is how it played out. In the end, he wanted to know if their hearts had truly changed. He overhears them because he understands Hebrew, and he listens, and he manipulates. And in the end, he reveals himself to his brothers. God had prepared him for all of this, and he is now reigning in Egypt. Do you remember a couple of things we talked about in this series so far is the idea of submissive dominance. When God created Adam and Eve, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over it, told Noah the same thing. So here you have a situation where you have Joseph rises up through faithful life, and he is now second in Egypt to Pharaoh. Do you think he gained any value from his experience in Potiphar's house that would prepare him for this? We went from running an estate, and I dare suggest it was loud, full of servants. This is a high-ranking Egyptian official, and he ran the whole thing. And now he's running all of Egypt. Do you ever look at life's struggles and see that there is a purpose in them? And what is God preparing you for? It's so quick to just look at the moment and go, this stinks, I hate it, I'm done with it, I want out, whatever the case might be. What is God preparing you for? I'll give you a little hint. There's a parable in Luke 19. There's a parable in Luke 19 that talks about our faithfulness. The king entrusts, and then he leaves. And what are we going to do with what we've been entrusted with? And sometimes what we're trusted with looks as sloppy and crummy as Joseph's life. If we're honest, it's probably not that bad, but for some, it is. There was a guy, I was thinking about him this week. He's a solid Christian guy. He was arrested for murder in the 70s in Simi Valley. He did 39 years in prison before the new police chief agreed to retest some DNA, and he was absolutely cleared. 39 years locked up. We hear stories of missionaries and martyrs wrapped up in our Bible translations. And this one's my favorite, this one's my favorite, and the King James was the first. Well, it wasn't the first. You ever heard the name William Tyndale? William Tyndale, not King James, is responsible for translating the scriptures and providing a copy of them to the English world and seeing to it that it went to the printing press. And the religion of the Dark Ages burned him alive at the stake for doing it. His final prayer was that the average boy on the plow would know more about the Word of God than the Pope does. And he translated the English Bible and was burned alive for it. And then they buried his ashes, and they realized that wasn't enough. They dug up the ashes and threw them in the ocean. I could sit here all day and go on and on and on about the price the people of God have paid to bring about the will of God on this dirt clod. What's the price you're paying? What's the price you're paying? And can you look at this and realize, if we're faithful, a little bit of the qualities of Joseph, I've entrusted to you. Governor of 10 cities as your reward. But you're submissive to the number one, Jesus Christ, reigning in Jerusalem on David's throne with his little number twos all over the dirt clod and maybe the world, the universe. We just don't know. Can you hold the line and be faithful? Joseph played a little bit of games, but in the end, Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room. He's got his family gathered, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Then he broke down and he wept. He wept so loudly the Egyptians could hear him, and the word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. But he said to them, "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still alive?" All those years, he has no idea. His brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. "Please come closer," he said to them. So they came closer, and he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. Don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives." He's not only faithful, he's now the model of forgiveness. And he actually reaches out to them and wants to remove the guilt or shame, which is, if resentment is towards others, guilt and shame is in, they're equally toxic. Don't be angry with yourselves. God sent me here. God has a plan for me, and this was my plan. This was my calling in life, and he had lived it well. And in the end, you probably know the story, the whole family moves there, and it kind of ends, at least this generation, relatively positive for them. What a beautiful, beautiful man. What an incredible job. I think we can look at Joseph right there second to Jesus Christ and the Apostle Paul. And you just stand back and you go, well done, dude. Well done. But what can we learn from the life of Joseph? To test your faith. And there's the faith, you understand, I don't ever want to downplay faith. It is the one condition that God has sent. You will agree with me. You will come to terms with what I did to save your soul. You will acknowledge my son. You will believe in him, or you will trust in him. You will put your confidence in him and nothing else, and your only response to that is faith. Yes, I believe that. And when you believe that, God's word says your sins are forgiven. That's faith. But this is next level faith. This is the faith of a true disciple who says, you know what? I will live this out no matter the cost. I will live this out. That when faith saves you, faithfulness makes God able to use you, and then to reward you. This is a lesson on family, a powerful lesson on family. And you know what? You might not be able to control the dysfunction that tweaked you when you entered into this broken world, but you can stop the dysfunction from the next generation. It doesn't have to continue. You may pay a price for that, but it can stop this dysfunction. He's a man of forgiveness, the likes of which I'm not there. Like, Lord, do I have to be able to forgive as beautifully as that man did? People in here have been wronged in horrible ways, and often. But you know what makes forgiveness easier? Seeing the bigger picture, seeing what God is doing through your struggles, and coming to a place where you realize the people that hurt me actually may have advanced the cause. Forgiveness. To me, I like the simple definition where you're really, okay, I don't want you to die because of what you did to me. There's my forgiveness. I don't wish death on you. Out of my face, out of my life. That's broken forgiveness. And if that's where you're at, that's okay. Because that level of forgiveness removes the resentment that you're sipping into your own soul. Stick with that. But this guy wanted to make sure his brothers didn't wrestle with the guilt and shame. Sure, he tested them, but in the end, he needed to know. And he genuinely forgave them. And then Joseph was a man about the future. And you think about all his victories and everything he went through. What does the New Testament say about Joseph? You would think that you'd get an amazing parable or two, or some story, something that paints the picture. I mean, to flee from the sexual immorality, to boldly stand up and declare, yeah, low-ranking cup guy or baker dude, your history, but to stand up right to the face of the son of Ra and tell him God's going to do this. Powerful, but that's not in the New Testament either. You want to know what's in the New Testament? And we'll end with this. When Joseph was dying, he said this, "Soon I will die," Joseph told his brothers, "but God will surely come to help you and lead you out of this land of Egypt." Why? Because of the promise. He knows that. He knows that God has a promise. He knows that God has a calling on his life. And I dare suggest he knew that involved the Messiah. You're going back to the land of Egypt. Didn't really know it was going to be another 400 years, but he will bring you back to the land he solemnly promised to give Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear on oath, and he said, "When God comes to help you and lead you back, you must take my bones with you." Why on earth would that be the one thing the New Testament wants us to leave with? Abraham was worried about his bones too. What are these men showing us? What was Job's answer? The one solution Job had: I'm going to die, I'm going to rot, but I will stand and I will look at my Redeemer. Joseph wanted to be a part of the Messianic program. Bring my bones, because when they rise, I want to stare at this Messiah who's coming from my family. Joseph was about the promise. Are you? Are you? And would you pay a price? Would you be found faithful? If not, it's easy because you're still alive. Just make a few adjustments. Make a few adjustments, a few priority changes, and see what God just might do. Father, what might you do through the broken lives in this room? What might you do through those of us stabbed in the back by family, did the right thing, it got worse, thrown into jail? How many of us, God, have been through things like that? We just don't know. But I dare say we paid a price to be on this dirt clod. God, what you work in and through us is to show us that you are not done. Our narrative has not ended. Would you work in and through us in powerful ways? And would we all respond to an example like this? Check our faith and our faithfulness. Check the family. How can we put an end to this? And God, would we learn to be as forgiving as Joseph? And we ask all this for the sake of your Son, for the message of the gospel around the world. We ask this for the sake of the promise. In Jesus' name, amen.